The Grand Concert Hall in New York was packed. Every single seat was taken. People had paid thousands of dollars just to be there that night. The lights dimmed slowly and you could feel the excitement in the air. Everyone was waiting for him. The greatest pianist alive, Victor Ashford. When Victor walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted. He was 52 years old, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had owned every stage he ever stepped on. His hair was perfectly styled, with just enough gray to make him look distinguished. His black suit was custom-made, fitting him like it was painted on. Everything about him screamed success. Victor sat at the grand piano and adjusted the bench. He didn't rush. He never rushed. The audience would wait for him. They always did. He placed his fingers on the keys, closed his eyes for just a moment, and then began to play. The music that came from that piano was something special. It wasn't just notes. It was emotion, it was power, it was perfection. Every single note was exactly where it should be. Not one mistake, not even the smallest hesitation. This was what 30 years of practice looked like. This was mastery. People in the audience closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. Some had tears running down their faces. Others sat completely still, afraid to move and break the spell. Victor was playing Rachmaninoff, one of the hardest pieces ever written for piano. Most pianists would struggle with it their entire lives. Victor made it look easy. When the last note faded away, there was silence. Complete silence. Then the entire hall exploded with applause. People jumped to their feet. They clapped until their hands hurt. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" and soon everyone was shouting it. Victor stood, bowed gracefully, and smiled. This was his life. This was what he did. After the concert, Victor was backstage in his private dressing room. It was more like a luxury hotel suite than a backstage room. There was expensive champagne on ice, flowers from fans all over the world, and a wall covered with framed photos of him with presidents, movie stars, and royalty. His manager knocked and entered. "Incredible as always," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "The reviews are already coming in. They're calling it the performance of the year." Victor sipped his champagne and nodded. Of course they were. He had given them exactly what they expected. Perfection. He had been giving them perfection for 3 decades. "The farewell tour is completely sold out," his manager continued, looking at her tablet. "Every city. London, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney. We could add more dates if you want." Victor looked at himself in the mirror. 52 wasn't old, but in the world of classical music it was time to think about legacy. He had achieved everything. He had played in every major concert hall in the world. He had won every award. He had recorded albums that went platinum. He had nothing left to prove. "No more dates," he said firmly. "After the farewell tour, I'm done. I want to end at the top." His manager nodded, though she looked sad. Victor Ashford retiring meant the end of an era. There was nobody else like him. Sure, there were other talented pianists, but none of them had his combination of technical skill and stage presence. None of them could make audiences feel the way he did. Victor's penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park. The view alone was worth millions. Inside, the walls were covered with awards, Grammys, honorary degrees from prestigious universities, certificates from music academies around the world. There was even a letter from a famous composer who had written a piece specifically for Victor. He poured himself a drink and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Down there, millions of people were living their ordinary lives. Up here, he was extraordinary. He had worked for it, sacrificed for it. As a child, he had practiced 8 hours a day while other kids played outside. As a teenager, he had no social life, only the piano. As a young man, he had turned down relationships, friendships, everything that might distract him from his goal. And it had worked. He had become the best. The absolute best. His phone buzzed with messages. Congratulations from other musicians. Requests for interviews. Fans telling him how his music had changed their lives. He scrolled through them with a slight smile. This was normal for him now. Expected, but somewhere, deep in his chest, there was a small feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness, exactly. Maybe it was just the knowledge that all of this was coming to an end. The farewell tour would be his last time on stage as a performer. After that, what? Teaching? Writing? Retirement? Victor pushed the thought away and finished his drink. He didn't need to worry about the future. He had built a legacy that would last forever. In 100 years, people would still listen to his recordings. Music students would still study his technique. His name would be remembered alongside the greatest pianists in history. He was Victor Ashford, the greatest pianist alive. Nothing and nobody could change that. Or so he thought. Tomorrow, he had agreed to do something he rarely did anymore. Judge a student competition at a music school in Boston. It was a charity event, something his manager had convinced him to do for good publicity. Victor wasn't excited about it. Student performances were usually boring. Talented kids playing the same standard pieces, making the same standard mistakes. But he had made a commitment, and Victor Ashford always kept his commitments. He would go, sit through the performances, smile politely, give some encouraging words, and leave. Just another easy day in his legendary career. He had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. The Boston Music Academy was buzzing with nervous energy. Students ran through hallways, clutching sheet music and mumbling notes to themselves. Parents fixed their children's hair and straightened their clothes one last time. Everyone knew that Victor Ashford himself would be judging today's competition. This was the biggest opportunity these kids would ever have. Victor arrived in a black car with tinted windows. He stepped out wearing sunglasses and a casual but expensive jacket. Even trying to dress down, he looked like he belonged in a magazine. The Academy's director practically ran to greet him, shaking his hand so enthusiastically that Victor had to pull away. Mr. Ashford, we're so honored, so incredibly honored, the director gushed. The students have been practicing for weeks. This means the world to them. Victor smiled politely and let himself be led inside. He was given a seat in the front row of the small auditorium, with a clipboard and scoring sheet. 2 other judges sat beside him, both local music teachers who looked terrified to be sitting next to him. They kept glancing at him and whispering to each other. The competition began. One by one, students came on stage. A 12-year-old girl played Mozart. She was good, technically solid, but she rushed through the piece like she was trying to get it over with. Victor marked his scores without much interest. Next came a 14-year-old boy playing Chopin. Better technique, but no emotion. He played it like he was reading a recipe, not telling a story. Victor stifled a yawn. Then a 17-year-old girl performed Debussy. She had clearly been well-trained, probably had expensive private lessons. Everything was correct, but it was also completely predictable. Victor had heard this exact performance 1,000 times before. Different people, same result. He leaned back in his chair and checked his watch. How many more students were there? He was already thinking about his flight back to New York. Maybe he'd have dinner at that Italian place he liked. He definitely wasn't finding anything interesting here. Student after student performed. They were all fine. Some were even quite good. But none of them surprised him. None of them made him sit up and pay attention. They were playing it safe, doing exactly what their teachers had taught them, trying desperately not to make mistakes. Victor understood why. When you're being judged by the greatest pianist in the world, you don't take risks. You play it safe. But safe is boring. Safe doesn't change anything. Our next performer is Daniel Chen, the director announced. Victor barely looked up. He was doodling on his scoring sheet, already mentally checked out. Then he saw the kid walk on stage and he almost felt sorry for him. The boy was tall and skinny, all elbows and awkwardness. His suit was at least 2 sizes too big, like he had borrowed it from an older brother or bought it from a thrift store. The sleeves covered half his hands. His hair was sticking up in the back and he kept trying to smooth it down as he walked. He looked scared. His eyes were wide and his hands were shaking. He fumbled with his sheet music, dropping some of it on the floor. There were a few quiet laughs from the audience. The boy's face turned red as he picked up the papers. When he finally sat at the piano, he had to adjust the bench 3 times before he was comfortable. Victor sighed quietly. This was going to be painful to watch. Then the boy spoke, and his voice was so quiet they could barely hear him. I'm going to play an excerpt from Opus Clavicemballisticum by Khosrow Sorabji. Victor's head snapped up. He sat forward in his chair. The other judges looked at each other in confusion. One of them leaned over and whispered, "What piece is that?" Victor ignored them. He was staring at the boy on stage with complete focus now. Opus Clavicemballisticum. That piece was legendary. It was one of the longest and most complicated piano compositions ever written. The full piece took almost 5 hours to perform. It had passages that were considered technically impossible. Some people said it was more of a mathematical puzzle than actual music. Victor himself had looked at the sheet music once years ago and decided it wasn't worth his time. Too much complexity, not enough beauty. Most serious pianists avoided it. The few who had attempted to perform it spent years preparing, and even then, most of them failed. And this awkward teenager in an oversized suit was about to play it? Victor almost laughed. This kid had no idea what he was attempting. He was probably going to embarrass himself completely. Victor actually felt a little bad for him. Someone should have stopped him from choosing this piece. The boy placed his hands on the keys. They were still shaking. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, nervous, exactly what Victor expected. But then something changed. The boy's hands found their rhythm. The shaking stopped, and suddenly, impossibly, music started to pour from the piano. Real music. Not just notes, but actual, beautiful, complicated, stunning music. Victor's mouth fell open slightly. He leaned even further forward in his seat. The piece that Daniel was playing wasn't supposed to sound like music. It was supposed to sound like chaos, like someone dropping boxes of notes onto a piano and letting them fall wherever they landed. But somehow this kid was making sense of it. He was finding patterns in the chaos. He was creating order from madness. His fingers were flying across the keys, jumping from one impossibly difficult passage to another. Sections that should have required months of practice, he was playing like they were simple scales. His hands moved independently, each one playing a different melody, different rhythms, different dynamics, all at the same time. The audience had gone completely silent. Even the parents who had been whispering stopped. Everyone was watching this skinny kid in the too big suit do something that shouldn't be possible. Victor couldn't breathe. He recognized what he was seeing because he had experienced it himself, 40 years ago when he was young. This wasn't just talent. This wasn't just practice. This was genius. Pure, raw, undeniable genius. The boy's technique wasn't perfect. Victor could see that. There were moments where his fingers were in slightly wrong positions. Sometimes his posture wasn't quite right. These were things that could be fixed with proper training. But what couldn't be taught, what couldn't be learned from any teacher, was what this boy had naturally. He understood the music. Not just how to play it, but what it meant, what it was trying to say. Daniel played for 20 minutes straight, 20 minutes of the most complex piano music ever written, and he didn't just survive it. He conquered it. He made it beautiful. When he finished, his hands came off the keys and he sat there breathing hard, staring down at the piano like he couldn't believe what had just happened. The auditorium was silent, completely silent. Nobody knew how to react. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Then someone else joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. People were standing up, shouting. Some of them were crying. Everyone was clapping. Everyone except Victor. He sat frozen in his seat, staring at the boy on stage. His clipboard had fallen to the floor. His hands were gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. Because in that moment, Victor Ashford realized something that terrified him. For 30 years, he had been the best. The greatest pianist alive. Untouchable. Unmatched. Nobody even came close. But this 16-year-old kid in a borrowed suit had just played something Victor himself couldn't play. Had just done something Victor couldn't do. For the first time in his life, Victor Ashford felt something he had never felt before. He felt threatened. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Daniel stood up from the piano bench, looking completely shocked. He bowed awkwardly, almost tripping over his own feet. His face was bright red, and he looked like he wanted to run off the stage and hide somewhere. Victor finally forced himself to clap. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind was racing. He watched Daniel shuffle off the stage, clutching his sheet music like a life preserver. The other two judges were clapping enthusiastically, smiling and nodding at each other. They had just witnessed something special and they knew it. Remarkable, one of them whispered to Victor. Absolutely remarkable. I've never seen anything like that. Victor nodded but didn't respond. He couldn't find words. His throat felt tight. The rest of the competition felt like it was happening in slow motion. More students performed, but Victor didn't hear any of them. He was still thinking about Daniel, replaying every moment of that performance in his mind. How had that kid done it? Where had he learned to play like that? Who was his teacher? When the competition finally ended, the judges had to deliberate. They moved to a small room backstage. The decision should have been obvious, but Victor found himself hesitating as he looked at the scoring sheets. Daniel Chen is the clear winner, one of the other judges said immediately. I mean, there's no question, right? The other judge agreed enthusiastically. That was the most impressive student performance I've ever seen. And I've been teaching for 30 years. They both looked at Victor, waiting for him to confirm. He was the famous one. His opinion mattered most. Victor looked down at his scoring sheet. He had barely written anything during Daniel's performance. He had been too shocked to take notes. Yes, Victor finally said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Daniel Chen wins. The award ceremony was quick. Students received their certificates and small trophies. When Daniel's name was called as the first-place winner, he looked genuinely surprised, like he hadn't expected it at all. He walked up to receive his trophy, and Victor had to shake his hand and smile for photos. Up close, Daniel was even younger looking than Victor had thought. His hand was calloused from playing, but his grip was weak and nervous. He couldn't make eye contact with Victor. He just mumbled thank you and quickly walked away. Victor was supposed to leave right after the ceremony. His car was waiting, but instead he told his driver to wait and went looking for the academy director. He found her in her office, practically glowing with excitement. Mr. Ashford, wasn't that incredible? Daniel Chen, I mean. That performance was— Tell me about him, Victor interrupted. Where does he study? Who's his teacher? The director's smile faded slightly. Oh, well, Daniel isn't actually enrolled here. He's a local student who applied to enter the competition. We almost didn't let him because he's not from a recognized music school. Victor frowned. What do you mean? Where does he take lessons? I don't think he does, the director said, looking uncomfortable. His application said he's self-taught. His family can't afford formal training. Self-taught. The word hit Victor like a punch to the stomach. That performance had been from someone self-taught. Impossible. I need his contact information, Victor said. The director looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Let me get that for you. That night, Victor couldn't sleep. He lay in his hotel room staring at the ceiling. His phone was on the nightstand, and every few minutes he would grab it and watch a video someone had posted online of Daniel's performance. The quality was poor, shot from someone's phone in the audience, but it was enough. Victor watched it over and over. He analyzed every movement of Daniel's hands, every phrase, every dynamic change. The more he watched, the more details he noticed, and the more impressed and disturbed he became. Daniel's hand positions were unconventional. Nobody had taught him the correct way to hold his hands, so he had developed his own technique. It was inefficient in some ways, but in other ways it allowed him to do things that traditional technique wouldn't allow. He could stretch his fingers in ways that seemed impossible. He could move between keys with a speed that defied logic, but it wasn't just technique. It was his understanding of the music itself. Saurabhji's piece was designed to be almost unplayable, a mathematical exercise in complexity. Most pianists who attempted it treated it like a puzzle to solve, focusing only on hitting the right notes in the right order. Daniel had done something different. He had found the soul in it. He had discovered that buried under all that complexity was actual emotion, actual meaning, and he had brought it to the surface. He had made people feel something from a piece of music that wasn't supposed to make you feel anything. Victor set his phone down and rubbed his eyes. He felt tired, but his brain wouldn't stop working. Questions kept spinning through his mind. If Daniel could play like that now at 16 with no formal training, what would he be capable of with proper instruction? What would he be like in 5 years? 10 years? 20 years? And then the question that Victor didn't want to think about. What if Daniel was better than him? No, that was impossible. Victor had spent his entire life becoming the best. He had sacrificed everything. He had practiced more hours than most people could imagine. He had studied with the greatest teachers in the world. He had performed thousands of concerts. He was Victor Ashford. But a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "What if being the best isn't enough anymore?" Victor got out of bed and paced around the hotel room. He caught sight of himself in the mirror. He looked older than usual. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. His hair seemed grayer, 52 years old. He had been playing piano for 45 of those years. He had reached the absolute peak of his profession. And now, on the eve of his farewell tour, some kid from nowhere had appeared and shaken everything he believed about himself. Victor pulled out his laptop and started searching online. Daniel Chen, pianist. A few results came up, mostly links to local news articles about student competitions he had won in the past. Nothing major. No professional recordings. No concert appearances. It was like he didn't exist in the professional music world. Victor dug deeper. He found a video from 2 years ago posted on a free video platform. It was Daniel, looking even younger and more awkward, playing Rachmaninoff in what looked like a school auditorium. The video had only a few hundred views. Victor watched it twice. Even then the talent had been there. Raw and undeveloped but unmistakable. How had nobody discovered this kid before? How had he slipped through the cracks? Victor found his answer in an article from a local newspaper. It was a human interest story about talented kids from low-income families. Daniel was mentioned briefly. His parents were immigrants who worked multiple jobs. They had bought him an old piano from a classified ad. He had taught himself to play using free videos online and borrowed books from the library. He had applied to prestigious music schools but had been rejected. Not because he lacked talent, but because his family couldn't afford the application fees, the audition travel costs, the tuition. In the world of classical music, which was dominated by wealthy families who could afford years of expensive training, Daniel didn't fit. He had been invisible, overlooked, ignored. Until now. Victor closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of his hotel room. His chest felt tight. He didn't know what he was feeling exactly. Was it anger? Fear? Jealousy? Maybe it was all of those things. For 30 years, Victor had been the greatest. Everyone had agreed. Critics, audiences, other musicians. He was the standard by which all other pianists were measured. His technique was perfect. His performances were flawless. His legacy was secure. But perfect technique and flawless performances weren't the same thing as what he had witnessed today. Daniel had played with something that Victor couldn't quite name. Something wild and free and completely honest. There was no calculation in his playing, no careful planning. He just felt the music and let it pour out through his fingers. When had Victor stopped playing like that? When had his performances become about perfection instead of passion? When had he started playing to maintain his reputation instead of playing because he loved music? Victor stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of Boston spread out below him. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably in a small apartment, maybe celebrating with his family, maybe already asleep, not realizing that he had just changed everything. Tomorrow, Victor would fly back to New York. He would continue preparing for his farewell tour. He would give perfect performances in every city. People would applaud and tell him he was the greatest, but now he would always know the truth. He wasn't the greatest anymore. Maybe he had never been. Victor couldn't let it go. He tried. For 3 days after returning to New York, he tried to focus on his upcoming tour rehearsals. But his mind kept drifting back to that performance, to that awkward kid in the oversized suit, to those impossible passages played with such natural ease. Finally, he gave in. He picked up his phone and dialed the number the academy director had given him. It rang 4 times before someone answered. Hello? A woman's voice, heavily accented. She sounded tired. Hello, my name is Victor Ashford. I'm trying to reach Daniel Chen. I was one of the judges at the competition in Boston. There was a pause. Then excited chatter in the background, people speaking rapidly in Chinese. The woman came back on the line. Yes. You are the famous piano player. Daniel is here. One moment, please. Victor waited, hearing muffled voices and footsteps. Then a different voice, young and nervous. Hello, this is Daniel. Daniel, this is Victor Ashford. I wanted to talk to you about your performance. It was extraordinary. Oh. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. That means a lot coming from you. The kid sounded like he could barely breathe. Victor could picture him, probably standing in his family's apartment, holding the phone with shaking hands, unable to believe that Victor Ashford was calling him. I'd like to meet with you, Victor said. Are you free tomorrow? I could come to you. You want to come here to Queens? Yes, is that all right? Yes, of course. Wow. Okay. The next day, Victor's driver looked confused when given the address in Queens. They drove through neighborhoods that Victor never visited, past small shops with signs in Chinese, buildings with laundry hanging from windows, crowded streets where kids played soccer with a makeshift goal. They stopped in front of a modest apartment building. The paint was peeling on the outside walls. The front door lock was broken. Victor told his driver to wait and went inside. He climbed 3 flights of stairs, the steps creaking under his feet. The hallway smelled like cooking spices and something musty. He found apartment 3B and knocked. Daniel opened the door. He looked just as awkward as he had on stage, wearing a t-shirt and jeans that were too short for his long legs. His eyes widened when he saw Victor standing there in his expensive coat. "Mr. Ashford, please come in." The apartment was tiny. The living room, kitchen, and dining area were all one small space. But it was clean, and Victor could see that the family had tried to make it nice. There were plants on the windowsill, photos on the walls, and a small table with a lace tablecloth. Daniel's parents appeared from the kitchen, both looking nervous and excited. His mother wiped her hands on her apron. His father stood very straight like he was meeting royalty. "Please sit," Daniel's mother said, gesturing to the small couch. "I make tea." Victor sat down, feeling strangely out of place. The couch was old, the cushions worn thin, but it was comfortable in its way. "You have a beautiful home," Victor said, and he meant it. There was something warm here, something real that his expensive penthouse lacked. Daniel sat across from him, perched on the edge of a chair like he might need to run at any moment. His parents brought tea in mismatched cups and then stood awkwardly in the kitchen doorway, not sure whether to stay or give them privacy. "Your parents can stay," Victor said. "I want them to hear this too." They sat down, both on the edge of their seats, holding hands. Victor looked at Daniel. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Daniel glanced at his parents, then back at Victor. "Mostly online. There are free videos, tutorials. I watched performances and tried to copy them. I read whatever I could find about music theory from the library. No teacher? We tried to find one when I was younger," Daniel's father said in careful English. "But lessons are very expensive." "We could not afford." Victor nodded slowly. "And that piece you played, Sarabji, how did you even find that?" For the first time, Daniel's face lit up a little. "I was reading about impossible piano pieces online. Someone mentioned it in a forum. I found the sheet music and thought it looked interesting. Like a puzzle." "A puzzle," Victor repeated. "Most professional pianists looked at that piece and saw a nightmare. This kid saw a puzzle. An interesting puzzle. Can you show me the piano you practice on?" Victor asked. Daniel looked embarrassed, but he stood up and led Victor to a corner of the living room. There, squeezed between the couch and the wall, was an old upright piano. The wood was scratched and faded. Some of the keys were yellowed with age. One of the pedals was held on with duct tape. Victor sat down at the piano and pressed a few keys. The sound was okay, but far from great. The tuning was off. The action was stiff. This piano had probably cost a few $100s at most. Victor's grand piano in his penthouse was worth more than everything in this apartment combined. And yet Daniel had learned to play like a master on this broken-down instrument. "Can you play something for me?" Victor asked, standing up. Daniel's face went red. "Right now, here?" "Please." Daniel sat down at the piano, his long legs barely fitting in the cramped space. He thought for a moment, then started to play. He chose something simpler than the Sorabji piece, something classical and well-known. But even in this simple piece, Victor could hear it. That same quality that had shocked him at the competition. The natural understanding, the effortless technique, the pure musicality. When Daniel finished, Victor was quiet for a moment. He was trying to process what he was feeling. 30 years ago, he had been a young prodigy, too. He had shown exceptional talent. But his parents had been wealthy. They had paid for the best teachers, the best schools, the best instruments. They had given him every advantage. What would he have become if he had started with nothing like Daniel? Would he have been as good? Would he have been better? Or would he have given up, his talent wasted, never discovered? "Daniel," Victor said slowly, "how many times did you apply to music schools?" Daniel looked down at his hands. 5 times. All the famous ones. But they all rejected me. Did they ever hear you play? No, I couldn't afford the application fees for most of them. The ones I did apply to, I submitted recordings, but I never got selected for auditions. I think they could tell from my submission that I wasn't professionally trained. Everything I did was wrong according to the standard techniques. Victor felt something twist in his chest. How many other kids like Daniel were out there? How many natural geniuses were being overlooked because they didn't fit the mold, because they couldn't afford the right credentials, because the music world was set up to find and nurture only the children of the wealthy? What are your plans now? Victor asked. Daniel shrugged, trying to look casual but failing. I'm going to community college next year. Maybe I'll study business or something practical. I'll keep playing piano for fun, but I know it's not realistic to think I could make a career out of it. Not realistic, Victor repeated. This kid, who could play pieces that most professional pianists couldn't even attempt, thought a music career wasn't realistic for him. Daniel's mother spoke up, her voice sad. We want him to be happy. Music makes him happy. But music doesn't pay bills. We want him to have stable life, good job, not struggle like we do. Victor understood. These were practical people who had worked hard their entire lives. They loved their son and wanted him to be secure. In their world, being a concert pianist was a fantasy, something only rich kids from privileged backgrounds could achieve. And they weren't wrong. The system was designed that way. But sitting there in that tiny apartment, looking at this awkward, talented kid and his worried parents, Victor made a decision. Something he hadn't planned, something that surprised even himself. What if I taught him? Victor said. Everyone stared at him. Daniel's mouth fell open. His parents looked at each other in confusion. What? Daniel finally managed to say. I want to teach you. Proper technique, music theory, performance skills. Everything I know, but a why? Daniel asked, looking genuinely confused. Why would you do that? It was a good question. Why would Victor Ashford, the greatest pianist alive, who was about to retire at the top of his career, suddenly decide to teach a kid he had just met? Victor wasn't entirely sure himself. Maybe it was guilt over his own privileges. Maybe it was recognition of something special that shouldn't be wasted. Maybe it was something else, something he couldn't quite put into words. Because you have a gift, Victor said simply, and gifts like yours don't come along very often. It would be wrong to let it disappear. Daniel's mother started crying quietly. His father gripped her hand tighter, his own eyes looking wet. We cannot pay you, Daniel's father said. We have no money for expensive lessons. I don't want money, Victor said. Consider it an investment in the future of music. Daniel looked overwhelmed, like he might cry too. I don't know what to say. This is incredible. But Mr. Ashford, I don't understand. You're about to start your farewell tour. You're retiring. Why would you take on a student now? Victor smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had felt in days. Maybe, he said, because I'm not quite ready to be done yet. The first lesson with Daniel was scheduled for the following week. Victor arranged for Daniel to come to his penthouse studio twice a week. It seemed simple enough. Victor would share his knowledge, polish Daniel's rough technique, and help guide this raw talent into something refined. But something unexpected started happening. Something Victor hadn't anticipated. It began with his own rehearsals. Victor was preparing for a concert in Vienna, part of his farewell tour. He was practicing a Chopin nocturne, one he had played thousands of times. He could play it in his sleep. Except this time, as his fingers moved across the keys, something felt wrong. He stopped and started again. The notes were all correct. The timing was perfect. The dynamics were exactly as they should be. But something was missing. Something fundamental. The music felt empty, mechanical, lifeless. Victor tried again, and again. Each time the same result. Technically perfect, emotionally dead. He thought about Daniel, about how he had played that impossible Sarabji piece. There had been nothing mechanical about that performance. Every note had meant something. Every phrase had been alive with feeling. When had Victor's playing become so calculated? When had he stopped feeling the music and started just performing it? He shook his head and kept practicing, but the doubt had planted itself in his mind like a seed. And seeds grow. The concert in Vienna was the first major stop on his farewell tour. The hall was sold out weeks in advance. People had flown in from all over Europe to see Victor Ashford's final performances. The anticipation was enormous. Victor stood backstage before the show doing his usual warm-up exercises. His manager came by to give him an encouraging smile. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect, except Victor's hands were shaking slightly. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt nervous before a performance. He walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The grand piano gleamed under the lights. Victor sat down, took a breath, and began to play. At first, everything was fine. His fingers found the keys easily. The muscle memory was still there after 30 years. But halfway through the Chopin Nocturne, something horrible happened. His mind went blank for just a second. Just 1 second. But in that second, his fingers hesitated. He hit a wrong note. Then another. He had to stop and restart the phrase. The audience probably didn't notice. It was a small mistake, the kind that happens occasionally even to great performers. But Victor noticed, and it shook him. He finished the piece and moved on to the next one. But now he was thinking too much, analyzing every movement of his fingers, second-guessing every choice. The spontaneity was gone. The joy was gone. He was just trying to get through it without making more mistakes. When the concert ended, the audience still applauded enthusiastically. The reviews the next day were positive. Victor Ashford remains a master of his craft, one critic wrote. But there was a subtle difference in the language. Words like solid and professional instead of breathtaking and transcendent. Victor read the reviews in his hotel room and felt sick. He had given them a good performance, but not a great one. Not the kind of performance people expected from Victor Ashford. He pulled up that video of Daniel's performance again, the one he had watched dozens of times already. He studied it, trying to understand what made it so special, and slowly, painfully, he began to see the truth. Daniel played like someone who had nothing to lose. Every note was a discovery, an adventure. He wasn't worried about his reputation or what critics would say. He wasn't trying to maintain an image or live up to expectations. He just played, purely and honestly. Victor played like someone who had everything to lose. Every note had to be perfect because his entire legacy depended on perfection. He had built his career on being flawless, and now that perfection had become a prison. The next concert was in Paris. Victor practiced obsessively, trying to recapture whatever magic had made him great in the first place, but the more he practiced, the worse it got. His playing became even more rigid, more controlled, more lifeless. During the Paris concert, he made more mistakes. Small ones, but they were there. A missed note here, a rough transition there. The audience still loved him, but Victor could feel the difference. He was falling apart, and he didn't know how to stop it. After Paris, he canceled the next 3 concerts. His manager was furious. The venues were threatening to sue. Fans who had traveled from far away were disappointed. But Victor couldn't do it. He couldn't go on stage and give mediocre performances. Not after being the best for so long. His wife found him sitting in his studio at 2 a.m, staring at the piano but not playing. She sat down next to him on the bench. "Talk to me," she said gently. "What's going on?" Victor didn't know how to explain it. How could he tell her that he was having an existential crisis because a 16-year-old kid had played better than him? How could he admit that after 30 years at the top, he suddenly doubted everything about himself? "I think I've forgotten why I play," he finally said. "I've spent so long being the best that I forgot music is supposed to be about more than being better than everyone else." His wife put her hand on his shoulder. "So remember, find it again, but how?" Victor had built his entire identity around being the greatest pianist alive. Without that, who was he? The first lesson with Daniel was scheduled for the next day. Victor almost canceled it. He didn't feel qualified to teach anyone right now. What could he possibly offer this kid who already had more natural talent than Victor had ever possessed? But he didn't cancel. Daniel arrived right on time, carrying a worn backpack with his sheet music. He looked around Victor's studio with wide eyes, taking in the concert grand piano, the walls lined with awards and photos, the floor-to-ceiling windows with the incredible view. "This place is amazing," Daniel said quietly. Victor gestured to the piano. "Play something for me, whatever you want." Daniel sat down and played. He chose a Bach prelude, something relatively simple. But the way he played it was anything but simple. Every note sang. Every phrase had shape and meaning. His technique was still rough in places, his hand positions unconventional, but the music was alive. Victor listened, and something twisted in his chest. This kid was everything Victor used to be before success and fame and pressure had turned him into a machine. When Daniel finished, he looked up at Victor expectantly, waiting for feedback. "Ready to learn. Your hand position on the thirds needs adjustment," Victor said, going into teacher mode. "And your pedaling is inconsistent. Let me show you." He sat down at the piano next to Daniel and demonstrated the correct technique. Then he had Daniel try it again. They worked for an hour on technical details, correcting years of self-taught habits, building a foundation of proper form. But as they worked, something strange happened. Watching Daniel learn, seeing him absorb corrections and immediately apply them, seeing his face light up when something clicked into place, Victor felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt excited about music again. Not music as a career or a competition, just music. The pure joy of sound and rhythm and melody. The simple pleasure of helping someone improve, of sharing knowledge, of being part of someone else's journey. When the lesson ended, Daniel thanked him enthusiastically and left. Victor sat alone at his piano, thinking. For 30 years he had been focused on staying at the top, on maintaining his reputation, on proving he was the best. Every performance was about defending his title. Every practice session was about preventing any decline in his skills. Music had become work, and work had become stress. Daniel had reminded him of something he had forgotten. Music could still be fun. It could still be exploration and discovery. It could still be about feeling something rather than achieving something. Victor placed his hands on the keys and started to play. Not something he was preparing for a concert. Not something he needed to perfect. Just something he wanted to play, for no reason other than that it made him happy. He played for 2 hours straight, trying pieces he hadn't touched in years, improvising, making mistakes and not caring, laughing at himself when he fumbled. His technique was still there, but now it was serving the music instead of strangling it. When he finally stopped, his hands were tired, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in months. His phone buzzed with messages from his manager. Venues wanting to know when he would resume the tour. Critics asking if he was all right. Fans expressing concern. Victor looked at his schedule. The farewell tour, his final performances, the grand ending to his legendary career. Maybe he had been thinking about it all wrong. Maybe this didn't have to be an ending at all. Maybe it could be a beginning. Victor called a meeting with his manager the next morning. She arrived at his penthouse looking stressed, carrying a tablet full of emails and schedules and problems that needed solving. Victor, we need to talk about the tour. She started before she even sat down. The venues are threatening legal action. We've had to refund hundreds of thousands of dollars in tickets. Your reputation is... I want to change the tour, Victor interrupted. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at him. What? The farewell tour. I don't want it to be what we planned. I want to do something different. His manager sat down slowly, looking like she was preparing for bad news. Different how? Victor had been up all night thinking about this. The idea had come to him after that second lesson with Daniel, and the more he thought about it, the more right it felt. I want to include Daniel in the performances, not just as an opening act. I want us to perform together. Share the stage. His manager's mouth fell open. She looked at Victor like he had lost his mind. You want to share your farewell tour with a teenage student nobody has ever heard of? Yes. Victor, do you understand what you're saying? People bought tickets to see you. Victor Ashford. The greatest pianist alive. They didn't buy tickets to see some kid from Queens. That kid from Queens is more talented than most professional pianists. He deserves to be seen. He deserves a chance. His manager stood up and started pacing. This is career suicide. The critics will tear you apart. They'll say you've lost your edge, that you're hiding behind a student because you can't perform at your best anymore. Maybe they're right, Victor said quietly. She spun around to face him. What? Maybe I've lost my edge. Maybe I can't perform the way I used to. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe there's more to music than being the best. Victor, please think about this. You've built an incredible legacy. Don't throw it away in some moment of self-doubt. You've just hit a rough patch. Every performer goes through this. You'll get through it, but Victor shook his head. This isn't a rough patch. This is a realization. I've spent 30 years at the top, and you know what I've learned? Being at the top is lonely. It's stressful. It turns music into competition instead of art. I don't want to end my career that way. So what do you want? I want to end it by doing something meaningful, by helping someone who deserves help, by showing people that music isn't about one person being better than everyone else. It's about connection, collaboration, lifting each other up. His manager sat back down looking defeated. The venues won't go for it. The contracts specify you performing solo. Then we'll renegotiate. Or we'll find new venues. Smaller ones if we have to. This is insane. Maybe, Victor agreed. But it feels right. His manager left, shaking her head, muttering about contracts and lawsuits and career suicide. Victor didn't care. He felt more alive than he had in years. The next step was talking to Daniel. Victor called him and asked him to come over that evening. When Daniel arrived, Victor sat him down and explained the idea. I want you to perform with me, not just in practice, but on stage. Real concerts. Starting in 3 months. Daniel's face went pale. What? No way. I can't do that. I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. You're better than you think. Mr. Ashford, I've been taking lessons with you for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Professional concert pianist trained for years, decades. I can't just go on stage in front of thousands of people. Why not? Because I'll embarrass myself. And I'll embarrass you. People are coming to see Victor Ashford, not some kid who barely knows what he's doing. Victor smiled. Do you remember what you told me about that Sarabji piece? You said it looked like an interesting puzzle. You weren't afraid of it even though it's considered one of the hardest pieces ever written. Why are you afraid now? Daniel struggled to find words. That was different. That was just a student competition. This is real. This is your career. Exactly. It's my career. And I get to decide how I want to end it. And I want to end it by doing something that matters, by showing the world a talent that deserves to be seen. Daniel looked down at his hands. What if I mess up? What if I forget the notes or play badly? Then you mess up. So what? I've messed up. Every pianist has messed up. The difference between amateurs and professionals isn't that professionals don't make mistakes. It's that professionals don't let mistakes stop them. I don't know, Daniel said, still uncertain. Think about it, Victor said. This is an opportunity that most musicians would give anything for. A chance to perform in major concert halls, to be seen by critics and other musicians, to launch a real career. You have the talent. All you need is the confidence. Daniel left that night without committing, but Victor could see he was thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, the lessons continued. Victor pushed Daniel hard, correcting every technical flaw, building his skills piece by piece. But he also learned from Daniel. He watched how the teenager approached music with fresh eyes, finding new interpretations in old pieces, not bound by tradition or expectation. During one lesson, Daniel played a Beethoven sonata. Victor stopped him halfway through. Why did you slow down there? Victor asked. Daniel looked confused. Was I not supposed to? It felt right to slow down at that part. The sheet music doesn't indicate a tempo change. I know, but the melody becomes more questioning there. Like it's hesitating, uncertain. So I thought slowing down would express that feeling better. Victor looked at the sheet music. Daniel was right. The melody did become more questioning. Victor had played this sonata hundreds of times and had never noticed that detail. He had always played it exactly as written, never thinking to interpret it differently. Play it again, Victor said. The way you feel it should be played. Daniel played it with the tempo change. It was beautiful. Unexpected, but beautiful. Victor realized that this was what he had lost over the years. The courage to interpret, to make choices, to put his own feeling into the music instead of just executing it perfectly. That was excellent, Victor said. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one right way to play something. Daniel smiled. A real smile this time, not the nervous half-smile he usually gave. After 6 weeks of intensive lessons, Daniel finally agreed to the joint performance. His parents were nervous but supportive. They couldn't quite believe this was happening to their son. Victor's manager had managed to rework some of the tour dates. Some venues had agreed to the new format. Others had refused and canceled. The tour would be smaller than originally planned, but it would happen. They decided to perform a 2-piano arrangement of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. It was one of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, requiring 2 pianists working in perfect coordination. It was bold and modern, and unlike anything Victor had performed on tour before. Are you sure about this piece? Daniel asked during practice. It's really hard. That's why it's perfect, Victor said. Neither of us can hide behind it. We have to work together, trust each other, support each other. That's what this whole thing is about. They practiced for hours every day. At first they clashed. Victor was used to being in control, leading every aspect of a performance. Daniel was used to playing alone, following his own instincts. But gradually they learned to listen to each other, to respond to each other, to become partners instead of teacher and student. During one practice session, they finished a particularly difficult section perfectly. Both of them stopped and looked at each other, grinning. "We just did that," Daniel said, sounding amazed. "We did," Victor agreed. "Do you think we're ready?" Victor thought about it. 3 months ago, he would have said they needed more practice, more polish, more perfection. But now he understood that ready didn't mean perfect. It meant willing to try, willing to take a risk, willing to share something real with an audience. "Yeah," Victor said. "I think we're ready." The announcement of the joint performances created a media storm. Some critics were excited, calling it a bold move that showed Victor's generosity and vision. Others were skeptical, suggesting that Victor was past his prime and using a student as a gimmick to hide his declining abilities. Victor read the criticism and found that he didn't care. For the first time in his career, other people's opinions didn't matter more than his own satisfaction with the music. The night before their first joint performance, Victor couldn't sleep. Not from nerves exactly, but from anticipation. He was excited, genuinely excited about a performance in a way he hadn't been in years. He walked to his piano and sat down in the dark, not turning on any lights. He played quietly, just for himself, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. 30 years ago, he had been a young prodigy with everything to prove. He had climbed to the top of his profession through talent and determination and sacrifice. He had become the best, but being the best had cost him something. It had cost him the joy of discovery, the freedom to take risks, the humility to learn from others. Daniel had given those things back to him. Not by being better than him, but by reminding him of what music was supposed to be about. Tomorrow they would perform together, master and student, but also friends, partners, two musicians sharing their love of music with the world. Victor smiled in the darkness. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether the critics loved it or hated it. The morning of the performance, Victor woke up early. Sunlight was streaming through his windows, painting the walls gold. He felt calm, more calm than he had felt before any performance in years. He made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up below. People were starting their ordinary days, going to work, running errands, living their lives. Tonight, some of them would come to Carnegie Hall and watch him and Daniel perform. They had no idea how much this concert meant to both of them. His phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Can't sleep. Too nervous." "Is this normal?" Victor smiled and texted back, "Completely normal. The day you stop getting nervous is the day you should stop performing. Nervousness means you care. What if I mess up? Then we'll handle it together. That's the whole point of this. You're not alone out there. Thank you, Mr. Ashford, for everything. Call me Victor, and thank yourself. You earned this." Victor spent the morning doing his usual pre-performance routine. Light breakfast, gentle stretches, some technical warm-ups on the piano. But today felt different. Usually before a big concert, he was running through every possible problem in his mind, worrying about every detail. Today he just felt ready. His wife came into the studio and watched him practice for a moment. "You seem happy," she said. "I am happy. I'm glad. I was worried about you for a while there." Victor stopped playing and looked at her. "I know, I'm sorry I put you through that. I was having a crisis, trying to figure out who I was if I wasn't the greatest anymore." "And did you figure it out?" "Yeah, I'm still a musician. I still love music. That's enough." She walked over and kissed his forehead. "I'm proud of you. What you're doing for Daniel, it's really special. I think he's doing more for me than I'm doing for him." That afternoon, Victor and Daniel met at Carnegie Hall for a final rehearsal. The stage crew was setting up the two grand pianos, positioning them so the performers would face each other across the stage. The arrangement created an interesting visual, like the pianos were having a conversation. Daniel arrived looking pale, carrying his suit in a garment bag. He had bought a new suit for this performance, one that actually fit him. His parents had insisted, scraping together money they didn't really have. Victor had offered to pay for it, but Daniel's father had politely but firmly refused. They wanted to contribute something. "How are you feeling?" Victor asked. Terrified, Daniel admitted. "I barely ate breakfast. My hands won't stop shaking." "Good, use that energy. Channel it into the performance." They did a quick run-through of the piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. Really good. Victor could feel the chemistry between them, the way they responded to each other's playing, adjusted to each other's tempo, supported each other through the difficult passages. When they finished, the stage manager came over. That was incredible, guys. The audience is going to love it. Daniel looked like he might throw up. Victor put a hand on his shoulder. Breathe. You've got this. We've practiced this 100 times. Your muscle memory knows what to do. Just trust yourself. What if I freeze up? What if I forget everything? Then follow my lead. Listen to what I'm playing and respond to it. That's all performing is, really. A conversation in music. We've been having this conversation for 3 months. Tonight we're just having it in front of other people. They went to their separate dressing rooms to change and mentally prepare. Victor put on his concert clothes, the familiar ritual helping him focus. But today, along with the focus, there was also excitement. Real, genuine excitement. There was a knock on his door. His manager peeked in. The hall is almost full. It's a sellout crowd. Are you ready? Yeah, is Daniel okay? He's nervous, but hanging in there. His parents are here, sitting in the front row. They look so proud it's breaking my heart. Victor smiled. Good, they should be proud. Victor, I just want to say I was wrong about this. I thought you were making a mistake. But watching you these past few months, watching how this has changed you, brought back your passion, I get it now. This is what you needed. Thank you for supporting me even when you thought I was crazy. That's what managers are for. As the start time approached, Victor made his way backstage. He found Daniel pacing in the wings, practicing fingerings in the air, his lips moving as he silently counted rhythms. Ready? Victor asked. Daniel took a deep breath. No, but let's do it anyway. The stage manager gave them the signal. The audience had settled. The lights were dimming. It was time. Victor walked out first. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People stood up, cheering for him before he had even played a note. He bowed, acknowledging them, feeling their love and support. This audience had followed his career for years. They had come to celebrate him. He hoped they would leave celebrating Daniel, too. Daniel walked out and the applause continued, though with a slightly confused energy. Some people in the audience weren't sure who this tall young guy was, but they clapped politely, giving him a chance. The two of them took their seats at their respective pianos, facing each other across the stage. For a moment, their eyes met. Victor nodded slightly. Daniel nodded back. A silent agreement. They were in this together. Victor placed his hands on the keys. Daniel did the same. And then they began. The Rite of Spring started with a single haunting melody. Victor played it, his fingers finding the notes with the confidence of decades of experience. Then Daniel joined in, adding a counter melody that twisted around Victor's line like a vine around a tree. The music built slowly, adding layers, becoming more complex. This was where the real challenge began. The piece required both pianists to play incredibly difficult passages simultaneously, maintaining perfect rhythm and coordination. One mistake could throw everything off, but they didn't make mistakes. Or rather, they made tiny ones that didn't matter because they were listening to each other so intently that they adjusted instantly, covering for each other, supporting each other. Victor watched Daniel's face as he played. The nervousness was gone. In its place was pure concentration, pure joy. The kid was in his element now, doing what he was born to do. His fingers flew across the keys, attacking the most challenging passages with fearless energy. Victor felt his own playing respond to Daniel's intensity. He pushed himself harder, reaching for notes he might have played it safe on, taking risks he hadn't taken in years. Daniel's courage was contagious. The piece reached its famous climax, a section so rhythmically complex that it felt like controlled chaos. Both pianos were playing at full volume, the sound filling the massive hall, shaking the walls. Victor and Daniel were completely in sync, their four hands moving like they were part of the same body, creating a wall of sound that was both terrifying and beautiful. And then suddenly it was over. The final chord rang out harsh and unresolved, hanging in the air. Silence. Complete silence. Victor and Daniel looked at each other across the pianos, both breathing hard, both knowing they had just done something special. Then the audience exploded. People leapt to their feet, applauding so loudly it was like thunder. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" And soon the whole hall was shouting it. The applause went on and on, wave after wave of it. Victor stood and gestured to Daniel, inviting him to take a bow. Daniel stood looking overwhelmed and bowed awkwardly. The applause somehow got even louder. They bowed together, and then Victor did something spontaneous. He walked across the stage and hugged Daniel. The kid was shaking, either from exhaustion or emotion or both. Victor held him for a moment, then stepped back and raised Daniel's hand like a boxing referee declaring a winner. The audience loved it. They were still applauding 5 minutes later when Victor and Daniel finally left the stage. Backstage, Daniel collapsed onto a couch, his hands over his face. Victor sat down next to him. "We did it," Daniel said, his voice muffled by his hands. "We did. That was the most terrifying and amazing thing I've ever done. That's how you know it was real." Daniel's parents burst into the room, his mother crying, his father trying not to cry. They hugged their son, speaking rapidly in Chinese, too emotional for English. Daniel hugged them back, and Victor could see his shoulders shaking as he started crying too. Critics and journalists wanted interviews. Other musicians came backstage to congratulate them. Victor's manager was grinning so widely it looked painful. "The reviews are already coming in," she said, showing Victor her phone. "Listen to this. Victor Ashford's joint performance with young Daniel Chen was nothing short of revolutionary. Rather than dimming Ashford's legendary status, the collaboration somehow enhanced it, showing a master at his most generous and a student at his most brilliant." She scrolled to another review. "This is what classical music needs. Not isolated virtuosos competing to be the best, but musicians lifting each other up, sharing the stage, proving that music is better when it's collaborative." Victor read through several reviews, all glowing, all praising both of them. But he didn't need the reviews to know the performance had been successful. He had felt it. He had felt the connection with Daniel, the connection with the audience, the pure joy of making music without ego or fear. Later that night, after the crowd had left and the hall was empty, Victor and Daniel sat on the edge of the stage, their legs dangling over the orchestra pit. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "What do you want to happen?" The tour was a phenomenon. Every city, every performance, the story was the same. Audiences came expecting to see Victor Ashford's farewell tour and left talking about Daniel Chen. But more than that, they left talking about what the two of them created together. In Boston, during a particularly emotional section of the performance, Daniel's playing became so intense that he broke a string on his piano. The string snapped with a loud twang that echoed through the hall. For a second, Daniel froze, panic in his eyes. But Victor didn't stop playing. He picked up Daniel's part on his own piano, covering for him, giving Daniel time to adjust. Daniel quickly shifted his hands to avoid the broken string and rejoined the performance. The audience didn't even realize what had happened until later. Backstage, Daniel had apologized over and over, but Victor just laughed. "That's live performance. Things go wrong. We handled it. That's all that matters." In Philadelphia, a famous conductor who had worked with Victor for 20 years came backstage after the show. He shook Daniel's hand and said, "Young man, you have something very special. Don't let anyone tell you how to play. Trust your instincts." Then he turned to Victor. "I've known you for decades, and I've never seen you perform with such joy. Whatever you two have together, hold on to it." By the time they reached Chicago, Daniel had gained significant confidence. He walked on stage now with his head held high. He made eye contact with the audience. He even smiled. The awkward, nervous teenager from the student competition was transforming into a real performer, but success brought new challenges. After the Chicago performance, Victor found Daniel in his dressing room, staring at his phone with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" Victor asked. Daniel showed him the phone. It was a message from a prestigious music academy, one that had rejected his application a year ago. Now they were offering him a full scholarship, praising his talent, inviting him to join their program immediately. "Isn't this good news?" Victor asked. "They rejected me," Daniel said, his voice bitter. "A year ago I sent them a recording. I played my heart out for that audition recording. They didn't even give me a chance to play in person. They sent me a form rejection letter. And now, because I'm suddenly famous, now they want me?" Victor sat down. "Yeah, I know how that feels. The music world can be superficial. When you're unknown, nobody gives you a chance. When you're successful, everyone wants to be associated with you. It feels fake, like they don't actually care about me or my music." They just want to say they discovered me. You're right, it is fake. But that doesn't mean you can't use the opportunity. That school has excellent teachers, incredible resources, connections to the music world. You could learn a lot there. Would you have gone there if they treated you that way? Victor thought about it. Probably. I was always good at swallowing my pride for the sake of my career. But you know what? You don't have to be like me. You can make your own choices based on your own values. Daniel looked at the message again, then put his phone away. I'll think about it. The tour continued. Los Angeles, Seattle, then across to Europe. In London, they performed at Royal Albert Hall, where Victor had given some of his most legendary performances. The British critics, known for being harsh, gave them standing ovations and glowing reviews. In Paris, something unexpected happened. During the performance, Victor made a rare mistake, playing several wrong notes in a row during a complicated passage. It was the kind of mistake that would have devastated him 6 months ago. But now he simply kept playing, working his way back into the piece, and Daniel adjusted to cover for him seamlessly. After the show, a young reporter asked Victor about the mistake during an interview. How does it feel, making a mistake during what's meant to be your farewell tour? The reporter asked, clearly trying to get a dramatic quote. Victor smiled. It feels human. You know what's funny? For 30 years I was terrified of making mistakes. I thought my reputation depended on perfection. But tonight I made a mistake, and you know what happened? The world didn't end. Daniel had my back. We kept making music. That's what partnership is about. The reporter seemed surprised by his honesty. The quote went viral online. People loved seeing Victor Ashford, the legendary perfectionist, admitting his mistakes and celebrating the human side of performance. As the tour went on, something beautiful was happening. Daniel wasn't just gaining fame and recognition. He was inspiring other young musicians from similar backgrounds. Kids who had thought classical music wasn't for them because they couldn't afford expensive lessons or fancy schools started reaching out on social media, sharing their own stories. One night in Berlin, Victor was scrolling through messages on his phone when he came across a video. It was a young girl, maybe 12 years old, playing piano in what looked like a school classroom. The caption read, "If Daniel Chen can do it, maybe I can too. Thank you for showing us that talent matters more than money." Victor showed the video to Daniel. The teenager watched it with tears in his eyes. "I didn't think about that," he said quietly. "I didn't think about other kids watching." "You're not just a performer now," Victor said. "You're a symbol. You represent possibility. That's a big responsibility, but it's also a beautiful thing." The final performance was scheduled for New York, back at Carnegie Hall where it had all started. The show had been sold out for months. Tickets were being resold online for thousands of dollars. The pressure was enormous. This was meant to be the grand finale, the perfect ending to Victor's legendary career. The day before the performance, Victor and Daniel did their final rehearsal. Everything was ready. They had performed this piece so many times now that they could play it in their sleep. But during the rehearsal, Victor stopped in the middle. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked. Victor stood up from his piano and walked across the stage. He looked out at the empty seats, thinking. "I've been performing for 30 years, he said, and tomorrow night will be my last performance as a concert pianist. I've been thinking about what I want that to mean." Daniel waited, sensing this was important. "When I started planning this farewell tour," Victor continued, "I wanted it to be a celebration of my career, my achievements, my legacy, all about me. But somewhere along the way it became about something bigger. It became about us, about music itself, about passing the torch to the next generation." "You've already done that," Daniel said. "You've given me opportunities I never dreamed of. I want to do more. Tomorrow night for the final piece I want you to perform solo." Daniel's eyes went wide. "What? No, this is your farewell concert." "You should end it." "I will be ending it." "By stepping back and letting you shine. That's the ending I want. Not me standing alone at the top, but me lifting you up so you can reach even higher than I did." "Victor, I can't. That's your moment." "No, it's our moment. Please. Do this for me. Play that Sarabji piece, the one you played at the competition. The one that started all of this." Daniel looked terrified and honored at the same time. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, Victor couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. How meeting Daniel had shaken his entire world. how it had forced him to confront his own fears and insecurities, how it had ultimately made him a better person and a better musician. He thought about his legacy. For years, he had assumed his legacy would be his recordings, his awards, his perfect performances. But now he understood that his real legacy would be Daniel. And not just Daniel, but all the young musicians who would see Daniel's success and believe that they too could achieve their dreams. Regardless of their background, the night of the final performance arrived. Carnegie Hall was packed with everyone who mattered in the classical music world. Critics, musicians, composers, conductors. Victor's wife was there, his family, old friends, former teachers. The energy in the hall was electric. Victor and Daniel performed their joint piece first, The Rite of Spring. They had played it so many times now that it felt like second nature. But tonight was different. Tonight every note meant something more. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for. They played with such intensity that people in the audience were literally on the edge of their seats. The connection between them was visible, tangible. They weren't just playing together. They were speaking to each other through the music, having a conversation that everyone else could witness but only they could truly understand. When they finished, the applause was deafening. Victor stood and bowed. Then he gestured to Daniel, who stood and bowed as well. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Then Victor walked to the microphone at the front of the stage. The applause gradually died down. Everyone waited to hear what he would say. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Victor began. 30 years ago, I stood on this stage for the first time as a young performer. I was terrified. I was ambitious. I wanted to be the best pianist in the world. And through hard work and luck and the support of amazing people, I achieved that dream. The audience applauded. Victor waited for it to quiet down. But somewhere along the way, I forgot something important. I forgot that music isn't a competition. It's not about being better than everyone else. It's about connection.